He can't even lift that ammo box, so what is he doing here? The question rang out across the training yard, accompanied by looks half of contempt, half of confusion. An old man with silver hair, stooped shoulders, and trembling hands, standing among fresh recruits brimming with muscle and ambition, yet he offered no retort, no explanation. He merely stooped, placed his hand on the wooden crate as though awaking a memory both distant and unbearably heavy. Was he truly nothing but dead weight? Or was there something about this man that no one here was ready to confront? All right, my dear viewers, get ready for a tale that will leave you speechless. Take a second to like the video and subscribe, and drop a comment below to let me know where you're watching from and what time it is for you. It's always thrilling to see people joining us from all corners of the globe. He's probably here to count bullets instead of firing them. A sneering laugh cut through the ranks, spreading like a slick of oil. Freshly issued uniforms pivoted to look half mocking, half curious. Someone whistled. Another cast a disdainful glance at the old man curled beside the ammo crate. He didn't look up. His gaunt hands slowly flipped through each ammunition box, scrutinizing the serial numbers embossed on the casings. With each gentle tap of his fingernail against the metal, he listened almost superstitiously, as if the sound held something he needed to confirm not with his eyes, but with his memory. Every movement was conducted with extraordinary hurried, unwavering like a ritual. But to the young soldiers around him, the sight was nothing more than a joke. A body far past fighting age, blurred eyes, trembling hands, hunched as though the weight of his life pressed down on him. All they saw was a relic out of place. What's that old man doing on the training roster? System error probably. He'll be dropped tomorrow. Whispers followed, confident and unyielding, as if his very existence were an unforgivable mistake. One recruit nearly kicked him as he passed, offering no apology. Another tossed a coil of rope at his feet, not bothering to speak. They walked past him, as though he were an inanimate object. He did not react. Not once did he lift his head. Not once did he frown. Only his hands continued their work with steady precision. The tangled strap was unthreaded and coiled with deliberate efficiency. The gun oil can was placed at the exact corner. The inventory clip was snapped neatly back into order. Every tool was inspected, wiped clean, and repositioned as though their arrangement determined someone's very survival. No one noticed how he sat always keeping just enough distance to avoid disturbing others, yet close enough that he could step in within 2 strides if help were needed. No one recognized the way he organized his gear always, in a sequence optimized for rapid response. Those details went unseen or unacknowledged. To them, he was simply slow, cumbersome, and outdated. A tall corporal slipped on his gloves, readjusted his bandolier, and smirked. Don't let him rig my rig. I'll have to reset it 4 times over. Another burst of laughter. Silas Granger did not take his eyes off the half-wound strap. He tugged gently, tightened it, adjusted the buckle, then flipped it over once more to test its slip, not out of pride, nor to prove a point. He had long since moved beyond that, knowing that honor lay not in gestures, but in results. That every small error, every lapse of attention, could cost a life. One recruit much younger than most watched him a beat longer than etiquette allowed. For a moment, his gaze held a flicker of uncertainty, a hint of hesitation. Then he turned away, swept up in the chorus of ridicule. No one wanted to be the odd one out, especially in the military. Amid all the noise, Silas remained the only point of stillness. A man seated amid a throng that dared not touch him and did not know why he was even there. No medals. No introductions. No sign of rank or past glory, just a battered toolbox, a faded uniform without insignia, and hands that trembled, yet moved with uncanny exactness. No one saw that he did not sit in silence from weakness, but because he had witnessed too many shouted commands cut short by the echo of explosives. He understood. In silence, the most vital things are often heard most clearly. And on that training field, no one heard a thing. Yet everything was starting to change from details no one bothered to notice. From the man, no one wanted to watch. The morning dragged by like the ticking of an old clock. Missouri sunshine spilled gold across the training yard. cutting across open supply crates and casting long shadows on the grim concrete walls. Lieutenant Mark Gaines was running through his equipment check his hand, gliding over the inventory list, his eyes scanning each crate of ammo, rope, and field training gear. Everything was exactly as expected, until his gaze landed on something, not on any list. It was a stitch, then 2, then 5. 5 copper-tinted, scorched dark stitches, painstakingly sewn into the left sleeve of a faded field jacket. No decorative trim, no official insignia. They lay silently against the worn fabric unassuming, yet impossible to ignore. Mark froze and took a half-step back as if to study them more closely. His eyes narrowed, and his mind began to sift through long-buried memories. There was one night in Kandahar, inside a soundproof tent. A classified report had circulated on nondescript gray paper, stamped in red. Classified Level V, eyes only. Within it, he'd seen a rough sketch of this very symbol. 5 stitches forming an inverted arrow, the covert identifier of the Shadow Operations Unit. No official records, nowhere in the training system, but Mark had heard of them. A covert unit assigned to missions that could never be publicly acknowledged, handling situations the government couldn't be tied to, at least on paper. Shadow operatives didn't exist on any roster, yet their presence was always felt where everything went wrong, where maps offered no safe exit. Mark glanced across the yard. Everyone was busy, oblivious. The old man knelt by the pile of harness gear, inspecting each carabiner as a seasoned craftsman would care for his tool. Son hurried, indifferent to the world's gaze. Mark approached. Each step carried unspoken questions, yet something told him there was no rush. This man was nothing like anyone he'd ever met. "You were in Shadow?" he asked in a low voice. Not interrogating, not accusing, merely seeking confirmation. A brief pause from the military current. The old man raised his head, his movement deliberate, as though even looking at another soul required careful thought. His eyes were not bright, they were as murky as old glass, but within them glimmered another kind of light, deep and fathomless, like the barrel of a rifle fired one too many times. He did not nod, he did not deny. No trace of pride, no hint of mockery. Just a moment of silence so brief it almost did not exist, yet enough for Mark to understand, enough to know he was right. That was not the silence of fear, it was the silence of someone who had outlived fear. Someone who'd walked where maps offered no roads, witnessed what no one ought to see, and returned not to recount, but simply to exist. Mark took a half-step back, silent as when he'd arrived. He needed no more words and dared not ask for any. Those stitches, they required no explanation. They spoke everything that paperwork never recorded. They were the symbolic seams of returns no one knew about, decisions never entered into any file, and the dead whose names vanished from the annals. Long after, Mark still had not walked away. He glanced at that sleeve one more time, then finally turned to leave. For the first time all morning, his footsteps were cautious. Behind him, the old man bent again to his unfinished task, untangling a snarled strap. But this time, his hands trembled less, as though part of the burden had finally been seen and understood. Dear viewers, please take a moment to relax or grab a glass of water, then stay tuned, the story has more surprises ahead. Comment 1 if you're enjoying this tale, so we know you're still here. The morning roll call did not begin with a command, but with a sudden shift in atmosphere. A silence no one ordered, yet everyone felt. The large doors of the command post swung open, and Colonel Erickson stepped in. He needed no introduction, his upright bearing, his face as cold as forged steel on Syria's battlefields, and the worn heels of his marching boots compelled every soldier on the field to snap to attention. But he did not approach the commanding platform as usual. He halted in the middle of the yard, his gaze sweeping the formation as if searching for something. Then he abruptly stopped, frozen in place. Everyone turned to follow his eyes. Three nestled in the crook of an old man's folded, faded jacket sleeve were 5 dark copper stitches, tiny, silent. Yet in Erickson's eyes they glowed like unhealed scars. A heavy breath passed through the yard. Silence, his voice sounded quiet, but weighted like a deep shockwave. The crowded training ground instantly fell empty. Even the wind seemed to pause. He strode toward the old man, then pivoted to face the formation. "This is Silas Granger," he said slowly and clearly, each word driving home like a nail. "In June 2009, I ordered the extraction of a special ops team besieged in Kandahar. A minefield zone, no comms, no maps, no support, and no hope left." Erickson paused, his gaze drifting beyond the brick wall behind the ranks as if looking back at himself, in that tactical room on that fateful day. 7 men returned from the jaws of death thanks to him. No navigation gear, only memory and silence. He spoke not a word, he simply guided us, step by step, breath by breath, through that field of death. A wave of unease rippled through the ranks. Those who had laughed, those who turned away when they saw the old man lugging ammo crates, now held their breath. Shadow Ops doesn't exist on paper, no insignia, no speeches, but I know they exist, because he carried my fallen comrades home, not intact but never abandoned. The wind resumed its whisper, the clatter of hanging weapons sounding like hushed voices. Erickson fell silent, not for lack of things left to say, but because nothing more needed saying. The old man's expression remained unchanged. His hands worked at a jammed magazine catch. Yet now every eye saw something they had never seen before. Absolute precision, not born of habit, but of memory and of pain. A few soldiers bowed their heads. A few exchanged furtive glances, as if to confirm they had been wrong. Everyone understood, in that moment, that none of them could ever call him a burden again. No one heard his words, yet everyone heard something very clearly from those 5 dark copper stitches. Not a symbol, but the scars of truths no one dared to tell. The young soldier stood silent for a moment, his hands clasped behind his back as if steadying himself before speaking. His question came so quietly, it almost dissolved into the air. "Sir, could you teach me how to clear a jammed magazine without looking?" Silas looked up. In his eyes was that familiar stillness, not indifference, but a measured consideration he had practiced hundreds of times in his life. The weight of deciding whether the person before him truly wanted to learn or was simply filling a curiosity. But this time, he sensed something different. Not a desire to prove himself, but a genuine earnestness. The young soldier, runnable to hide the flush of embarrassment in his eye strully, wanted to know, not to show off, but to understand. To grasp something no one had ever explained to him. Silas said nothing. He simply nodded a slight, almost imperceptible motion, enough to let the soldier know he agreed. No further questions necessary. When he placed his hand over the soldier's, an odd sensation crept into the young man's chest, not instruction, but silent guidance. Tiny adjustments, nearly invisible, a gentle press, a pause placed just so, no words, yet perfectly clear. Silas did not lecture, nor assert authority. He merely transferred skill, as though every movement of his hands was so steeped in life and death that thought was no longer required. And when Silas withdrew his hand, the young soldier felt a hollow ache, as if he had been entrusted with something sacred and was uncertain if he was worthy to keep it. The first time, the young soldier went too slow. He failed. Silas did not correct him, did not speak. He simply watched his gaze, neither judging nor disappointed, only patiently waiting. The second time, Silas handed the magazine back gently, as if placing a question in the soldier's palm. "What now?" "Close your eyes." Those words rang out not as a command, but as a reminder. On the battlefield, everything can go dark, not from the sky, but from blood, from smoke, from chaos. In that moment, the only guide is feeling. The soldier shut his eyes. His breath caught, his hand trembled, and then a very faint click sounded, quiet, yet decisive. The magazine had released, in silence. He opened his eyes, hardly able to believe what he'd done. And at that exact moment, he caught Silas's gazino surprise. No praise, only affirmation. As if Silas had known it would happen, having seen it before the soldier even realized. Not long after, others began to step forward. Not out of curiosity, but because they had heard not with their ears, but with that vague recognition only those who considered themselves strong until they touch something truly necessary can feel. Silas did not change his tone or his expression, he remained silent. But each time he placed his hand on another's, he left behind something hard to name, a piece of the years no one else knew, a shard of the reason he still sat here, in silence made habit. No one asked him where he had been, no one asked whom he had lost. But after each demonstration, each slight nod, each quiet moment of waiting, everyone understood. He was teaching them more than a skill. He was teaching them how to survive. When everything else has vanished, for the full 30 minutes, he spoke almost nothing, and when he did, it was only brief prompts. Stop, go back to the start, or a simple, slight nod. Yet strangely, that alone was enough for those clumsy hands to grow steadily more sure. One young soldier released a safety latch without ever looking down. Another detected an odd metal contact in the wiring assembly by the feel at his fingertips. Skills once thought too specialized to gain within a standard training camp were now passed on in Silencino pens, no screens, no questions. Each person who approached carried an invisible distance. Yet they left with something new, not merely a skill, but a different awareness. A fresh view of the man seated among them. No one can recall who first raised a phone to record, perhaps it was instinct. But that hand was stopped not by command, but by a glance. Not from Silas, but from a comrade standing nearby. As if everyone understood, some things are best preserved not on film but in the shift of the witness's heart. And so, one by one, they came. No orderly queue, no jostling for turns, yet order prevailed automatically. Respect never demanded, yet plainly visible in their eyes, in the way they listened as though marking each breath and every movement of his hands. Finally, a corporal stepped forward, the same one who'd laughed first when Silas arrived at the camp. His face was etched with hesitation, as if crossing into unfamiliar territory. Still, he spoke. You really were someone who saved others' lives? The question fell between them, both a confession and an apology. In that moment, the distance separating the two men old, one young was not measured in years, but in understanding. Silas did not become angry, nor did he offer a smile. He simply looked at the corporal, as if he had heard that question countless times, in many different forms. I didn't save them, he replied, his voice neither heavy nor sad, just a simple clarification. I just brought them home. No one spoke after that. No words were needed, for in that gaze, on that face, in the silence that followed, everyone understood that those few words contained an entire world. Perhaps he never saw himself as a hero, nor did he need a medal pinned on him. To him, surviving was not victory, but burden. Every person brought home carried with them the unspoken presence of one who did not return. Every time he crossed back from death's door, he carried in his heart unnamed faces and eyes closed forever in silence. And that is why he never spoke, because one should not burden others with those truths unless they are prepared to carry them for a lifetime. But now, standing before him, were not those who once judged, but those opening their hearts not to hear of war, but to learn how to see a man not by age, not by rank, but by what he leaves in the hands of another. No more mockery, no more half-scornful glances. On that training field, only soldier-souled and young stood, quietly observing one another, beginning to question all they once took for granted. About strength, about silence, and about how a single man, even unarmed, can change an entire unit simply by sitting down and sharing what no one else could teach. Late afternoon, no more orders, no more laughter, only scattered footsteps and the long shadows of soldiers stretching across the oil-stained concrete in the dying light. Silas remained seated. The same old motions, wiping a cartridge, adjusting a strap, inspecting each small clasp as though it bore a life's weight. No one told him yet he did it, as if something inside would not let him overlook a single detail. A group of soldiers approached, no defensive posture now, no hesitation in their eyes. Mr. Granger, thank you for staying. The simple words carried the weight of a bono obligation, no ceremony, just a truth that needed saying. They were grateful not just for teaching them to disassemble gear, but for being there before they even knew they needed him. Silas gave no verbal reply. He merely nodded a slight, almost imperceptible motion, then stood. His back bowed slightly, gait slow, but steady. No hurry in his steps, only the certainty of someone who has learned to walk away at the right moment. As he passed Lieutenant Gaines, he paused. Without staring, without lecturing, he asked quietly, like a final reminder, "Do you know why I never spoke?" Gaines shook his head. Silas spoke slowly, not exactly answering, but as though reminding himself, because they needed to learn respect on their own. When no one stands there anymore to teach, the only thing they remember is how a man quietly fixed their straps. He said no more and then walked away. That was the last time anyone saw Silas Granger cross the training yard, not as a soldier, not as an instructor, but as a living memory quietly departing once his work was done. The next morning, the toolbox lay in its usual place, cleaned, neatly arranged as if never opened. But he was gone. On the workbench sat a folded scrap of paper, placed just so, unsigned. Someone unfolded it and read the slanted, even handwriting of a man accustomed to writing in darkness. When you see someone who seems clumsy, don't be quick to judge them useless. They may be the very ones who helped you survive. Without your knowing. There was no sign of where he went, no farewell, no mention of why, yet no one searched for him, no one questioned his absence. For it seemed everyone understood. He did not come to stay, he came to leave something behind. And he did just that, not through lectures, but through his presence. Not through authority, but through patience. Not through words, but through the silence of listening. From that day on, no one in the camp ever used the term burden again. No one referred to him with a casual call. They used only one phrase, when speaking of him: concise, few words, but heavy with meaning. The one who brought them home. And whenever a newcomer arrived, suspicion in their eyes, ready with hasty judgments, the veterans did not correct or argue. They simply told one story. Of an old man, an ammo crate, and 5 dark copper stitches no longer called mere stitches, but a mark. Some people leave no medals, they tell no tales of the past, they demand no recognition, they quietly do their part correctly, consistently, unseen. And one day, when they depart, you realize it was their silent presence that changed everything. The story of Silas Granger is not to glorify deeds. It reminds us that respect does not come from rank or voice, it comes from how one lives, acts, and leaves value for others without needing credit. If you've ever seen someone who seems frail, slow, or out of place, slow your pace by a beat. Perhaps they are the very ones keeping this world from falling apart. If this story moved you, please leave a comment below. Share your thoughts, memories, or simply a note of thanks for people like Silas. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this video so the story doesn't end here but travels on to those who need a reminder of true respect.